and a great welcome to the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists. And as you might imagine, with a name as long as that, we generally call ourselves WCIT. My name's Les Green, and in the next 90 minutes or so, we're going to be hosting this growth tech event in which we're going to explore two key issues which we know greatly impact so many entrepreneurs. That's raising capital and finding talent. We got four great speakers to help this evening, and they're going to cover all the bases, from an investment director at one of the UK's leading venture capitalists, the chair of an international recruitment firm, and two successful entrepreneurs that are actually driving new business ventures now. So clearly they'll have a real interest in that area. It's hard to believe, but this is actually the 11th Growth Tech event that we've held. And with a bit of good fortune, it might be the last one that we have to hold virtually. But as I said a few minutes ago, we had over 100 registrations for tonight, as well as the last one, in fact. So I think we're going to have to think carefully about how we go back into the WCIT hall, where we can only accommodate around 55. But that's a very good problem to have for the future. Now, before we get underway, for those of you which are new to WCIT, I thought it'd be really helpful to explain briefly about some of the important activities that we undertake. And who better to do that than our present master, Mark Holford. So Mark, over to you.
First of all, I thought perhaps I should explain what the master is. It basically means I am the chairman for a year, and I'm roughly halfway through my year because I started in October. I myself have been involved in really quite a lot of startups in my career. Although I worked in insurance, I was a corporate entrepreneur, and I think I've started or been involved in the starting of 5 businesses, and I'm currently the chairman of one small tech company and also chairman of a wine company, both of which have started in the last 5 years. So I'm really interested in today. So livery companies have their origins, of course, in the medieval guilds. And the oldest livery company today is the Weavers, which dates from the middle of the 12th century. And there are 110 of them. We are proud to be number 100, although if you're a good IT mathematician, you might say we're in a 100 binary and therefore number 4. That really winds up the big livery companies. We have 800 members, and all livery companies have at least 4 pillars on which their activities are based. And the first thing is fellowship. And that's in a way what we're doing today. It's about networking, about knowing each other, being friends with people. And actually that's what drives our activities, because people like Les and I have become friends, and therefore we enjoy working together. And that's a key part of what we do. Our industry, of course, we support our industry, and of course that's the tech industry. And in some cases, of course, there are dying industries or no longer in existence with some livery companies, but they adopt new ones. I'll give you the example of the Horners, who used to make horn objects, who are now heavily involved in the plastics industry. The next thing is education. We support 2 schools, and indeed we founded one, co-founded it with the Mercers, which is the richest and the #1 livery company, and that's the Hammersmith Academy. And we also support the Lillian Baylis Technology School, which is in Vauxhall. And that means in both cases we provide money, and also we are, particularly in the case of the Hammersmith Academy, I think we're entitled to appoint 3 of the governors, and we appoint one of the governors in the Lillian Baylis. And then the last thing that all livery companies are important about is charity. And I think I'm right in saying last year or the year before last, we gave away £73 million collectively. And that makes us probably the 5th largest donor in the United Kingdom. We ourselves gave away in 2019, 400,000. That's a bit more than usual. Our average would be more like 150 to 200,000, but we had some special grants we made in that year. And over the last year, we in particular have asked people to make donations for coming to events like this, some of which we would normally charge for but haven't charged for in the past year. And that's earned us £18,000 simply by the generosity of people. It's also, by the way, people who've given up their cup of coffee or can no longer buy their coffee in Starbucks. So they've given us the £1 a day that they would spend in Starbucks. But that's a great effort. So anyway, that's really what a livery company is all about. And I think with that, I'll hand back to you, Les.
So It's now my pleasure to invite Andy Bloxham, who is Forsyth's director, and he joined Forsyth in 2018. For those of you who perhaps not familiar with Forsyth, they're really one of the largest investment funds in the UK, as I'm sure he'll explain. Well, they did something very special for the tech world by creating a joint venture with the Williams Formula One spin-out, Williams Advanced Engineering. So that's quite a powerhouse in terms of investment into early stage companies. So Andy, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Les. Given this is a growth tech event, I think it might be worth just telling you all how Forsyth started, because I'm going to talk to you about the fund that I manage, which, as Les said, is a technology-focused fund, and that's where Forsyth started back in 1984, down in Sevenoaks. And between 1984 and 2004, it grew from 0 to 10 people and a fund of about 40 million. But from 2004 to 2021, it grew from about 40 million under management to 6.7 billion under management, and now has a couple of hundred employees spread all over the world and listed on the FTSE a couple of weeks ago. So a real success story as a startup in its own right. And that was one of the things that attracted me to Forsyth, and also the fund that I focus on, which is the Forsyth Williams Technology Fund. As Les said, this is a joint venture between Forsyth and Williams Advanced Engineering, which was the spin out from the F1 team. And the idea is that we combine the technical expertise of Williams with the knowledge and the track record of investing in early stage companies of Forsyth, and together we bring a strong proposition to both manage the risk and identify really exciting technology companies and help them as they grow. And we've chosen a strategy that focuses on our strengths. So that's businesses that engineers would understand and be able to add value to. And that's normally hardware technology or industrial software. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a background of what my day-to-day job is. I started life as an investment banker 20 years ago. Then I had a period of about 10 years doing a similar role to what Les does now, helping companies raise money and helping companies undertake transactions, generally small, fast-growing UK technology companies. And then for the last 10 years, I've been investing into those companies. So over that time, I've seen a lot of challenges with raising funds. And now I think we've probably maybe work out some of the things that make a story resonate with investors. And that's what I want to focus on. I've only got 10 minutes, so I want to focus on making a good first impression, maybe getting that first meeting or getting through that first meeting, and talking probably about your approach to the pitch deck. And today's pitch deck is the old business plan. That's the document that all investors would expect to see. And we see, on average, my funds see roughly one new business plan every day. So I see a lot of these pitch decks and we hear a lot of investor stories, and some of them definitely stand out. And when we're flicking through them, we're looking for a credible team with a credible plan and an interesting opportunity. We're looking for that potentially large opportunity, chance of making investment returns, good, really strong investment returns, but a team that understands the risks and can articulate the story. What I'm going to say today is it's the emotional story that wins investors over rather than necessarily the data. You have to get the story first, get the hook, and then come to the data later. And these are the points I'm going to focus on today. The things to remember. It's probably going to take longer than you expect. It will take more meetings than you expect, and it will take more effort. So plan accordingly. First impressions do matter. Don't underestimate the power of a beautiful looking pitch deck. It does help. Make it easy for the audience. Put it in a format that they understand. Allow them to tick their boxes. Everybody has to justify the story to their internal committee or their investors, and you want it put it in a format that makes it as easy as possible for them to do that. And finally, a point that I'm really beginning to understand is stick to your strong arguments. don't dilute your arguments. Don't try and put too much into your pitch deck. Keep paring it back to the strongest points that you can make. So I'll just go through these now one by one. First one, don't underestimate the time and effort involved. It can be a long process, and there's been research on this. DocSend, which is a technology that allows companies to share their pitch decks with investors, they think that you might need 40 meetings. And investors might spend as little as 3 minutes reviewing a deck. And I think this is probably right. If I received a deck through email, I probably would flip through it in less than 5 minutes. And that may be the time that it takes me to say, is that worth a meeting or not? And this, what I'll go through now is what I think will really help get that meeting. And the first impressions matter. So I said a beautiful deck helps, but also the format of the deck helps. And the format that I think really works is the deck that's proposed by Sequoia Capital. So Sequoia Capital is one of the leading venture capital investors in Silicon Valley. And they've got their 10-section slide deck or business plan that really works. And DocSend have, in their research, looked at that, and they agree with Sequoia. These are the best 10 sections that you can use to put in your deck. And what I'm going to do today is to focus on the first part of that deck, because I think it's the first part of the deck that tugs at the investor's emotions. That's the hook. It's the why are you doing what you're doing, the purpose, the problem that you're solving, how you're doing it, the solution, and then why now. That's what I'm going to focus on right now. So first of all, defining your business. Can you distill it down into one sentence? The best companies have really strong taglines that just resonate with you, and you think, wow, that sounds worthwhile, even in that one sentence. And people want to understand what you're doing before you go into the detail. And if they don't understand what you're doing, so if an investor's not nodding along with you on that first slide, they're probably going to switch off when you go through the later details. So it is really important to spend time getting that one sentence right before you go into the detail. And next, it's into the problem and the solution. This leads into how big the opportunity is. So it's really important. And a common mistake that I see with companies raising money is they often define the problem as a trend. What's going on in the world? You know, if it was an environmentally friendly solution, we want to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. But remember, the investors looking for investor returns, they're looking for people to pay, typically for what you're going to produce. So in their mind, the problem is, why is somebody going to pay for what you're doing? It may not be today, but ultimately. And the solution is, how are you addressing that pain or producing that gain? How are you going to charge for it? So it's the business proposition as opposed to the trend in the world that might create the opportunity for your business. The trends are relevant though, but in Sequoia's language, or the point that resonates with me, is that's the why now slide. What is it that's going on in the world that means it's worth investing in your business right now? What is it? What combination of technologies or skills or experience is it that has come together that's going to allow your business to do it now? And why has nobody done it before? And it's always really good to have a curve on your slide that's going from the bottom left to the top right. Everyone loves it, even if it's completely visual. It still looks like you're demonstrating growth, even if you're just actually telling a story. And then just coming back to the problem and the solution. This is called the value proposition canvas, and it's a way of noting down how you're going to satisfy a customer problem. And it's just further thinking about how you're articulating the problem that you're solving and the solution. And you'll see here that on the right-hand side, you've got some customer jobs. What are your customers actually trying to do? And on the far left, you've got your product and service. But no, it's the benefits that you're trying to convey, both to the investors and your customers, not the features. The features, what does your product and service actually do, is different to what benefits in terms of the gain that you're giving to your customers or the pain that you're taking away. That's what investors are interested in. That's what gets them excited. That's the emotional hook. They're saying, oh, I can see why this could be really big. But remember, you're focusing on who your customer is. So when you're selling your product, the customer is somebody that's going to buy your product. When you're selling your business for an investment, you're trying to resonate with an investor. So you're trying to show how your business is going to make investor returns. And that's why it goes beyond the idea. It's the idea that's going to make money. And it's not just, is it going to make money? But have you considered the risks and are not going to fail in the meantime? As Les said, one of the biggest challenges is not running out of money. And you'll see here this quite reasonably famous research about why startups fail, building something that nobody wants or running out of money. And as Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, one of the most successful startup accelerators in the world, says, you probably don't even need to worry about number 3 because most companies fail due to 1 or 2. Although I think team's pretty important, and that's fortunately we're going to come on to that in the next talk. So you're trying to show investors that you've thought about all of those reasons why you might fail. And this is this is not a list that I came up with myself, but I do think it's a good summary of broadly the boxes you need to tick for an investor to take you forward versus the red flags, if you like, to them that would make them ask questions or not take a meeting. But that's a lot of information. So do remember to stick to your strong arguments. And this is, I'd always thought about this in terms of, I always wondered why it was sort of clean pitch decks, reasonably sharp pitch decks were the ones that resonated with me. And I didn't know why until recently when I found this TED talk called The Dilution Effect, the counterintuitive way to win arguments. And it's the old phrase, quality, not quantity. And the mistake I see a lot of founders make, particularly as they go through 40 meetings, like the DocSend slide said at the start, you tend to get feedback after every meeting, and then you add a line into the deck to try and address the question that one investor asked. And then before you know it, you've got a deck with 15 points on every slide. And as the dilution effect says, people tend to average out the points that you make on the slide rather than add them up. So far better to pare it right back to the most strongest points. Do challenge yourself every so often to go back to a blank sheet of paper and make sure the argument that you're trying to make is really coming through. So they're the key points that I think will help get you through the door, make a strong, compelling pitch deck. Do remember it will take longer than you think. Plan accordingly. Start earlier, start warming up investors, test the message. First impressions do matter. The beautiful pitch deck helps, but warm introductions help. Even a well-crafted email around your pitch deck, if that's your first interaction, a LinkedIn cold approach or an email, it's worth taking the time to get it right. Make it easy for your audience. Remember what they're trying to do. They're in that situation, they're your customer. Do remember that and try and make it as easy as possible for them to say yes to what you're asking. And it's quality, not quantity. The stronger points will come through far more clearly if you don't dilute them with the weaker points.
Andy.
Yes.
That's absolutely excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And you were pretty much bang on time. So well done. There was a question that came in actually relevant to the work that I do and that you used to do, which said, in terms of people who are trying to get investment from a group like yourself, is it necessary to know someone as an intermediary or know someone within your fund, or is it okay to send them in cold? I guess the question is, and then maybe the supplement to that would be, does it give anybody the edge from the fact that they know somebody rather than coming in cold?
It doesn't give them the edge to get investment. It can get you a first meeting, but sometimes it can be the first meeting for the wrong reasons. And what I mean by that is you can do your friend or colleague or the person that you know, you'll do them a favor. That doesn't mean that you're truly believing in the proposition or giving it the time of day. So it can get you through the door, but you've still got to have everything else. And if you've got a compelling deck or opening, you should get a meeting regardless of whether it's a warm introduction or not. I respond to plenty of cold emails or cold approaches on LinkedIn.
Now, you mentioned that you have about 30 opportunities a month. I think you said, did you say it was one a day?
Roughly one a day, yeah.
Have you ever done any analysis of how many of those go through your pipeline and how long it takes? So if you had 30, or let's say that's about 400 a year roughly that are coming in, does that lead to 4 investments, 40 investments? What sort of analysis have you got on that?
We track it for our fund. So since the foundation of our fund, which is nearly 3 years ago, we've seen just under 1,200 opportunities, and we've invested into 21 companies, 29 investment rounds into 21 companies.
Right.
And that's in the Forsyth Williams Fund. In terms of the Forsyth Private Equity team, they see 1,700 business plans a year, and there's 100 companies in the portfolio. So incredibly selective. See a lot of plans. Yeah.
And I've got just one last question from you. So what's the process that you prefer? Do you prefer to get a soft copy or the electronic copy first, or do you want a conversation first?
I think it varies by investor. I prefer to get something over email. I think that's partially because I'm an introvert. So I'm thriving in lockdown. The joy of missing out is the phrase they use now, not the fear of missing out, the joy of missing out. So I like to get some information over email. It doesn't have to be the full deck. You can take out some of the confidential information or take out the slides that have got more detail. But in terms of that emotional hook that I was talking about earlier, I quite like to get that on email. If it's somebody, coming back to that point, the question earlier, Les, yeah. If you've got a relationship with somebody and you trust them, you trust their judgment to bring you good opportunities, they can make a call and say, you should see this. And I'll say, okay, without seeing the deck, I'll take a meeting. Yeah. But I like to get something on email. I don't think you can do any harm if you share stuff by email.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Andy. That's super. I'm sure there'll be some more questions at the end as well. But for now, thanks very much.
Can I just add one thing, and just to emphasize it? In my experience, the running out of money often is because you don't start early enough. And I absolutely bear out your point about really probably double the time you think it's going to take you, or even triple it.
That's right.
Yeah. So with a success rate of about 1.5%, then Samantha, it's over to you actually. Now, Samantha Maxwell-Reid, she founded a company called Expand Executive Search, and basically created a global talent firm for tech and telecoms people. I think I've probably known you, I don't know, too many years actually, Samantha, probably about 12 years, I think, one way or another. But, your firm was a real powerhouse, and the great success is that you managed to do an MBO, or somebody else managed to take the business off you last year. So you've become a bit more of a lady of leisure. So we're looking forward to hearing very much about the story on the global talent side.
As Les kindly said, my name's Samantha Maxwell-Reid, and Les asked me to come and talk to you this evening about building teams within early stage businesses. So who am I and what do I know? So why am I here? I'm talking to you in 3 guises, really. Firstly, I've been a technology headhunter for 20 years. I've recruited for both global enterprises as well as startup businesses as they start to hyperscale. And as Les said, I built a UK and US based headhunting firm called Expand. And the context of that really is that we became an employer of choice in our sector. Recruitment isn't always the best known sector for careers, but we won awards for the way we rewarded and recognized people. We had very low staff attrition, and let's be brutally honest, the ROI on that was high levels of productivity and performance. And then lastly, following my MBO, I had intended to have a year off, and I've taken on something of a passion project, which is becoming a bit all-consuming. A software company called Naught. Please check them out via my LinkedIn profile. They've developed a software solution that offers a multiple of 150 improvement in accuracy over GPS. They recently secured $500,000 in investment, And I'm supporting their journey to go from 3 to 20 people in the next couple of months. So we really are very much early stage. And it's really exciting to take all the things I've done before and do it in-house. So I'm talking to you in those three guises today. So when I had to think about what I could share with you that would be hopefully valuable and interesting, I think there's two agendas really. There's the strategic people agenda. And while some of these concepts seem a bit highfalutin and you may be thinking, wait till we've got a head of HR or a CPO to take on the strategic piece, I think it's really vital to start this soon. We're in a very competitive world for hiring right now, and the employee experience is vital both in retention, output performance, and ability to attract and hire. I think you can't start thinking too soon about the team behaviours. How do you want your team to operate together? What's okay? I'm reluctant to talk about values, but it's really about how people relate to each other. And there's a whole new level of complexity with us being remote in doing that. Obviously, engagement becomes important if you're thinking about those things. How are you going to measure people? What are going to be their outputs and what are going to be the key result factors? How are you going to know if the people you're hiring about early stage, when their contribution is vital, how are you going to know if they're doing a good job if you don't know what the benchmark is? So I think that's really important to address fairly early on. Diversity and inclusion isn't just for the big boys. There's undoubtedly enormous value from diversity of thinking and avoiding groupthink. And I'm going to shoot myself in the foot with that in a moment by talking about something else when we talk about sourcing. But as much as possible, I would sincerely suggest that you think about building an inclusive and diverse team as quickly as you can. Reward and recognition vital, and I think it's really important to be thinking about, how do you protect that early stage cash? How do you not run out of money? And at the same time, you reward people and don't just get caught up in paying through the nose and paying above market rate to secure talent. And fundamentally, all of those things come together to create your employee brand. So, as I said, those are all fairly strategic things that you might not think early stage businesses need to consider. But I think the sooner you start having that at the base of your thinking, the better. So, we move on to the tactical people agenda. What are you really going to be thinking about in the early stages, sort of post initial investment? And this is a really interesting one. And I said I'm going to use Naught as a bit of a case study. They're very focused on what their burn rate is. And so we've done a lot of work looking at what are the triggers for when we're going to be hiring and bringing people in, and what does that do to our cash burn. I've then had to sit down with the founders, and this has been quite a painful experience, and they're finally 2 months in getting the reason why I made them do this is to actually think about the role design. The CTO just said to me, yeah, I need some AI talent. I want somebody who knows about PyTorch and MATLAB and Keras and yeah, just go find me that skill. Yeah, but Nick, what are they going to do? What is their job? You can't attract people to come and work for you if they don't actually know what the task is going to look like. We've put time into that, and it's made the whole recruiting process so much easier. You then need to think, and I'm going to delve into some real practical suggestions on how you can source talent. Hiring the wrong people is known to cost an organization up to 5 times annual salary. So, it's where you're sourcing your talent and who you're hiring is so important. And I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail at the moment. Selection process, it's important to think about how we're actually going to assess, select and decide who we hire. And once you've done that, to be consistent with it. And lastly, to think about onboarding them. There's a huge movement within the people agenda right now to talk about moments that matter and how do you make people feel good about their work. And I believe onboarding is a vital part of that process. So it doesn't have to be logoed mouse mats, water bottle and t-shirt on their desk or being sent to them to their home. But I think making people feel welcome, making them land so they can be productive quickly is really important. The thing that I get asked about a lot, people say, well, what's the recruitment world doing right now? And I think if you look at the current market, it's important not to get carried away, and quite, it is sad, it is a horrible, one of the unintended or one of the consequences of the last year is that we are predicting 6.5% unemployment in the UK by the end of this year. What I would say to you is that there's 890 Python jobs been advertised in the last 14 days. And I know that Python's a very generic skill, but the competition, I can tell you, Expand has never been busier. We have never been mandated for more hires. So there is huge pent-up demand. And I would imagine as a startup business, you're going to be looking for talent that's more likely to going to be in demand than not. So this is really kind of the real nitty-gritty, the real how do you do it stuff. And I hope there's some stuff here that will help you and will be useful to genuinely help you find talent. Finding talent without doubt can be the thing that costs the most and takes the most time. I would recommend, and this is very much for early stage businesses, don't underestimate the power of your network. Posts on LinkedIn telling the people you know what sort of skills you're looking for, what roles you're hiring in your business, using local enterprise networks, using all sorts of communities where you can talk about hiring, and starting to build your employer brand are hugely valued. We are already seeing direct applicants to Naught through that process. Again, it's quite time consuming, but I would heavily recommend, putting some time and energy into building a Work for Us page on your website. Again, fairly quickly, people will be coming to you to think, okay, what careers could this business have for me? We have a generic catch-all email address as well. If you don't see a role here that's interesting, we're pipelining, we're going to be hiring later in the year, keep in touch. Universities have been phenomenal, and I would strongly recommend reach out to universities, and they're providing three kind of tools right now. One, most universities seem to be offering interns, either undergraduates for a summer internship or indeed graduates looking for their first opportunity. So the universities through joint funding will give you talent through an internship program. The recent, I don't know if it's commonly known, but there's recent changes in visa legislation, which means that international students who are here on Tier 4 visa can typically stay for 2 years now. So international students are another option. And lastly, their job boards are phenomenal. We're picking up some really smart grads through the university job boards, and it's largely free. We're starting to build connections to get involved. They're all doing online open days and trying to support students remotely. So even though the big sort of milk round type events aren't happening face to face, they are still virtually. So can't underestimate the value of reaching out and having relationships with the universities. Job boards. I'm a headhunter. I've never liked a job board. But I have to say, places like Indeed, which are free and actually have a really good CRM tool to track and manage your candidate flow, can't be underestimated. So I would recommend sensible use of some job boards to bring in more talent. Apprenticeships. I think thinking about apprenticeships has changed. And again, there's some really great people doing all sorts of learning whilst they're in the workplace. At Naught, we've been looking at Kickstart, and it's really quite phenomenal. It's only just going live now. You typically need to take 30 young people between the ages of 16 to 24 and give them 25 hours of work a week, which is completely funded by the government. It's free resource. What I would say is you can go to a gateway organisation. We can't take 30 people at Naught, but a gateway organisation will allow you to take 1 or 2. The hope is that these people get unemployed, people who are early in their career, are looking for career opportunities, and it's giving them some real life work experience. I know one ad tech business have taken 30 already to start this summer. And last but not least, I would strongly recommend looking for a long-term relationship with a specialist recruiter. And by that, what I mean is looking for somebody who's probably offering a more modern solution. At Expand, about 3 years ago, we developed what we call a TAS model, talent as a service. Don't go paying through the nose 25, 30% of salary to ad hoc relationships. So yeah, a good recruiter will have its day at a certain point in your growth. I think my top tip, lastly, is hire slow, put lots of time in, be sure, and if it doesn't work, fire fast. There's no room for passengers in a startup. So yeah, that's me, Les.
Samantha, well done. You also were very good for time. That's excellent. And
Thank
we
you.
do have a couple of questions for you, which is great. One question was deciding, particularly as a business, how do you decide what skills you actually need? The process involved in that, in terms of trying to research it or work out. What would you suggest in that area? Because clearly you're doing that yourself at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's an evolving process. So, for example, we knew within Naught that we needed some statistician and maths modelling capability. We also felt we needed an AI developer, and we were looking at somebody. This was going to be a sort of a second round hire. And what we've actually learned is that the mathematics modeler we hired already has some capability that has changed our hiring plan. So I think for me, my recommendation would be look at what you need today and then review that plan regularly as your team lands and start to contribute.
Another question around the work from home culture, because clearly this last year things have changed, to say the least. And have you got any feedback on how those sort of demands of candidates are changing, in the sense of either wanting to work from home or the demands they're going to have while they are at home?
I don't think it's changing. I think I've seen a curve. I think I've seen a curve in Expand. What we were seeing, so we're talking 12 months ago, was initially there was almost a euphoria about being at home, and everyone thought they found the Holy Grail, and they were doing a HIT class at 7 a.m. and having breakfast with the kids and being at their laptop by 9 and happy days. And I think what I've seen is a lot of people go full cycle, and now they're desperately missing the sense of community. They're missing the collaboration. And I think, I'm sure Mark's going to have a really interesting view on this, but I think a blend of the two is what we're seeing most in demand now. I think people have proved they can work at home. What they'd like is the flexibility to choose.
Just a last question for you, Sam. This came in from our master, and I must admit I would concur with this, and I'm sure a lot of other people would as well. The difficulty in actually trying to employ salespeople, because salespeople, by the nature of them, are good salespeople. So you get them for an interview, and that's what you'd expect them to do. So often when you do the due diligence on them or you do the checks, it all looks fine. Have you got any hints or tips about trying to employ good salespeople? What would you suggest?
It is a very, very real problem for exactly the reasons that you've identified. My advice would be to be very, very consistent and thorough in your selection process. So one of the things we at Naught we've asked people to do is we have asked them to look at our offer and to come in and present what they perceive the value to be to a customer. And we're going to be measuring them on how much endeavour they put in, how much research they commit to, and what the outcomes are from that.
Right. Great. Thank you very much indeed, Samantha. That's super. and I'm going to hand over to Mark Leaning next. Mark is the CEO of Directed Systems, and this is a business which obviously I'll explain to you in a few minutes. That's in the med tech area. As I mentioned in my intro, though, Mark is a serial health tech entrepreneur, and he did take a previous startup all the way through to 100 million valuation, which I'm sure Andy would say you don't get too many of those that come along. More's the pity. Anyway, in the case of Directed Systems, it's already had some funding from Innovate UK, along with quite a number of high net worth individuals. So, Mark, without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Les and Phil, for inviting me. I must say I've enjoyed the talk so far. I've made quite a few notes. I'm feeling a bit like a case study about to appear on the horizon. So I'm Mark Leaning. I'm founder and CEO of Directed Systems. So you could call us a sort of data software company in the health technology space. We're trying to use data to improve outcomes and reduce costs in healthcare in a specific way, which I'll explain. We're based in Cambridge, in the United Kingdom. We have rapidly growing operations in the United States, which is our main market. And later this year, we're building a presence in Germany to deal with the EMEA markets. And so, yeah, as a general description of what kind of business line I'm in, you could say we're a health tech company. So we're actually focused on very sick patients who are in hospital, in the emergency room, in intensive care, undergoing surgery, under anesthesia, etc. And we specialize in fairly deep algorithms and innovative visualizations to help in the management of those patients. We have a focus around the cardiovascular system, which is, I guess, at the heart of things and ever present in these situations. And although there seems to be a lot of technology, and there is a lot of technology in these environments, it's still very much up to the doctor and nurse to watch what's going on, be vigilant, to interpret it, to recall everything that's going on. And that's simply not possible all of the time, which kind of takes me to the question of why are we doing this? And working with intensive care doctors and anaesthetists around the world, I became aware they were concerned about all sorts of complications that arise in the patients during those periods of care, which are bad for the patient in terms of outcomes, but they're also costly. They require extra treatment, time in hospital, it costs money, considerable money to the hospitals, and it also blocks beds for other patients. And one of the things we've seen in the pandemic almost nightly on the news is that there aren't actually, it's not a question of ventilators, there are just not enough doctors and nurses who can look after all these very ill patients. So this is it's a massive global untapped need. But the inspiration I had was that as more data is digitized in healthcare, and we know that, and it's becoming more connected, then our opportunity to use information technology to help interpret, predict, get insights from these data streams becomes enormous. And one day we'll be able to automate some aspects of those treatments as well. And this will allow things to be done earlier and better. My dog obviously doesn't like the lecture I'm giving because he wants to go out the room. I can see him in the background. He's been on so many Zoom calls, it's shocking, he should know by now. Earlier treatment will help reduce complications and anticipate problems and give those better outcomes and productivity that we're looking for. But a solution for this problem in Cambridge is not just good for our NHS hospital down the road, it's actually applicable worldwide. And so it's actually a huge and very exciting commercial opportunity. And don't forget, I said at the beginning that although we're a startup, we have our major operations now taking place in the United States. So just moving on to the experience and issue of talent, and it is, as everyone said so far, getting the right people is the currency of a startup or any business, but particularly a startup business. And in my experience, it's not just finding the rocket scientists for your business, but you actually have to cover the bases. One that I would mention, first of all, is that as you're growing your business, the people you bring in have to be good at building teams and that culture as well. You can't just leave it up to the boss to do that. Everyone's got to be bought into that. For a technologist, I make a very strong emphasis on other areas such as sales, good operations people, and certainly very good strategic marketing right from the get-go. We operate in a highly regulated area, so making sure you've got the right regulation quality people is important. Pretty obvious expertise at fundraising. Sometimes you may not have that in the team, apart from the entrepreneur, but look at it, the board's an opportunity to bring on those sorts of people as well. It's a very good thing to do. And then, of course, last and not least, you do need those rocket scientists. I try and aim for the best in as diverse a way as possible, and very, very incremental, as Sam was saying. I thoroughly agree with that. We aim to be a global business, and so don't wait until the pot of gold comes at the end of your first market rainbow. You have to do that right from the start, and actually that helped me a lot with recruiting the right talent. We were doing all of this way before the pandemic, and apart from the fact that I can't visit hospitals, the pandemic really didn't change much of the way we were operating. And finally, on this slide, I found that when it's a bit like pitching to investors. If you can pitch your company so it's compelling and simple and has an emotional resonance, I think that does help in recruitment because it's competitive. So on the thorny issue of money, my first tip is don't go into the health tech business area because it is actually a long, Les is laughing, it's a long haul. It's very rewarding and financially and from personal satisfaction point of view, but they do take quite a lot of funding before you get to revenue. And so managing the financing, the cash, is absolutely central for it's a critical success factor for your business. Our first product required regulatory approval before we could market it. Healthcare market is a conservative market. They have this maxim, which you'll have heard on the news a lot as well, first do no harm. And that means that they might not want to buy your product. So there are some barriers that you have to encounter, which requires patience by the founders like me, the first investors that you bring in, and the rest. We adopted a minimum viable product approach, which is common in other areas, less so in health tech, where in less than a year we went from the concept to a cleared FDA product that we could sell, and that's extremely helpful. It also allows you to be much more moderate in the way that you recruit people and control your cash burn. And so there is hope, let's say, if you can find the route into the market. I can't say how important it is to be capital efficient. It's not just a health tech business. It's very important for us, but I think that's a general maxim. It's very easy to suddenly recruit a lot of people and burn a lot of money and not find yours sufficiently advanced. I recommend not doing that. So apart from capital efficiency, we've also found that government grants are a very good source of finance. In our space, the NIHR offers some 100% grants, which are great if you can get them. We've been very successful with 3 Innovate UK grants. They cover 70% of the eligible costs. They are competitive, perhaps not quite as much as some of the investment firms, but of that ilk. So you have to be crisp, you have to answer the questions properly and understand what they're truly looking for. On the whole, I haven't used grant writers, but we're looking at doing that in the future. So just a few sort of closing remarks. I've been very fortunate in growing a number of successful businesses, and there are sort of 2 things which are always present in that. One is raising the money, and the other is finding the people. It's a real catch-22 because you can't build a business without the people, but you can't hire the people without the finance, as it said. you have to make the most of goodwill, getting people on to build milestones that you can then demonstrate progress, get in front of the customers early, and then work your way through the investor system. It's not smooth. I'm pleased to say I just literally closed around this week. So that the process leading to that is never smooth. It takes longer than you think. And so finally, this is all what is needed to be an entrepreneur, as many of us are on this call today. These are the skill sets that we need to run these kind of businesses and make them successful. Les, thank you.
Mark, excellent as always. Thank you very much indeed for that. I'm just going to pose one question for you, if I may, which I think is relevant to the sort of business that you're in. My experience of health tech tends to be, it goes from sort of zero to hero, really. I mean, you have to go through, as you say, a lot of regulatory processes to get yourself approved before you can even start selling. And then because it's life and death stuff, people don't want to put the product in because they want to be sure it's okay. So lots of proof of concept stuff before you even get there. So with that in mind, and the fact that the growth curve after that tends to be quite rapid, how have you found the other part of financing, which is trying to get grants? Because that must obviously be a major part of what you do in terms of funding the business. Is that an easy process now? Has it got any easier over the years, or is it still as difficult as ever?
It's vital. It's competitive. You haven't got. It's not a process like you have with investors, where you can see that they're getting more and more interested. So, like buying a house or something, you know you're going to get it at the end almost. You might spend a lot of time putting a grant application in, and then you wait for months, and then you're not sure whether you're going to get it or not, and then you've just scored 69% and you needed 70%. So you can't bank the money until you've got it. So it's really important. You've got your strategies for the business have to be that you can survive without grants, and then the grants just maximize your success and allow you to speed things up. Sometimes it's not the best thing for a business to go for a grant or to do a grant at a particular time, because you're not aligning your core strategy of your business with what the grant people want. And you've got to be careful about that. So you've got to make sure that not only are you in scope with the program you're bidding to, that the program scope is in line with what you're trying to achieve in the business. Read the questions and answer them carefully is my number one tip. And the one that people mostly forget. It's really curious.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to leave that there. There are going to be some questions, I think, at the end, but I'd like to give the opportunity for Nick to pop in here as well, if that's okay. So, as we said earlier, Nick, last but definitely not least, Nick is a statistician and Oxbridge man, but a slightly unusual speciality, and that is happiness. And over the last 6 years or so, Friday Pulse, I believe, has worked with over 9,000 teams and about 1,000 organizations. But one of the very interesting things I believe about Nick is that he's got the unusual distinction of a TED Talk, which had over 2 million views. And I think in itself, that's pretty impressive. So Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Les. I do feel like sort of going to be Monty Python and like now completely different, but no, actually it builds on all sorts of things. And I face actually many of the problems about investment that other people do. But I want to talk about building happy businesses and being the key to long-term success. And as Les said, I am a statistician. I've got over 25 years experience in measuring quality of life, well-being, that sort of thing. I also trained as a therapist. My mother was a therapist. And so maybe it becomes I'm the guy that does sort of data about happiness at work. I'm an accidental entrepreneur. You know, I had a whole first career, which was about public policy. And that's what my TED Talk was on, really about how governments should measure well-being and quality of life. And then I got caught up in an idea that I was interested in. But there's a Spanish philosopher I like called Ortega y Gasset, and he says, I am myself and my circumstances. And I come out of a certain set of circumstances. And Les was encouraging me to speak about this today. So this is slightly lateral, but this is a picture of my ancestors. So on the left, meet my great-grandfather, Sidney Herbert Marks. In the middle, my grandfather, Sidney Marks. And then on the right, my father there as a young man in the 1950s and his brother, John. And what did these three generations of people do? Well, they built a business which was very successful and very happy. And you almost certainly will have heard of it. It's Treble Sweets, which when it was sold, I think was the largest family company in the UK. And this is sort of my sort of history. And there's a beautiful book called The Treble Story that actually my second cousin wrote, laying out the whole history of Treble and how it grew. But it was a startup in 1907. It was 4 East End guys boiling sweets, and my great grandfather was the salesman. The Treble brand name is, as Les was saying, it is Robert backwards. That is a true story. There was some Treble villas around the corner of the first factory, and two of the founders, one was called Cyril Robertson, one was called Robert Woodcock. It was called Robertson Woodcock, the company to begin with, and they wanted a short name, so they chose that. But it was a very forward-thinking business. So I looked it up, and the employee pension scheme was launched in 1930, the 1930s. They had insurance in case of death for any employees in the 1930s, and they were absolutely paternalistic. But it was a benign paternalism. It was a benign dictatorship. They were very family orientated, and they expanded very rapidly. In fact, I worked out the expansion rate. So they grew 20% a year every year from 1907 through to 1989 in value. It was extraordinary business. Lots of very funny stories. Sugar rationing to get around it. You weren't allowed to import sugar into the UK in the late 1940s, early 50s, or very limited amounts. But my grandfather worked out that there was absolutely no legislation on the sugar content of mineral water. So he imported vast quantities of mineral water, which had very high sugar content in them. And in the 1970s, Sheffield University did a study of a new factory they built called Colchester, and it was the happiest factory they'd ever seen. It was a very good company. Of course, there were problems, and actually one of the problems was that my father and my uncle argued for about 20 years, but it was eventually sold in 1989 when I'm just left university, really. And so, what do you do as a young man following in that history? There was no opportunity for me to go in the family business. It was gone. Well, I decided I would do something completely different. And I ended up specializing in measuring well-being. And obviously, in my own way, I created my own success in the sense that I founded a team in 2001 out of nothing about well-being. And we ended up advising the Blair and Cameron governments on how they should measure well-being and everything like that. But after I finished my TED Talk, which was obviously a huge event, a TED Talk is an extraordinary opportunity. You spend many months preparing for it. I did figure out pretty quickly afterwards that it didn't change anything at TED Talk, really. It gave you an opportunity, but it didn't really change anything in it. So I had to really think about what I wanted to do next. And I chose to work on work. I thought I'd sort of go back to the roots of what I was doing, and I try and build a business that helps build happy businesses. That was sort of in the family tradition, but using my own skill set. I think if I'd realized how difficult it was to build a business, I might not have done that, but that's what I did. And in a sense, what I want to say is that all of the data shows that building a happy business leads to success and innovation. It's not the only way to build a business, but if you run a happy ship, you're going to go further. And there's lots of data on that. And I have lots of data on that. I'm not going to go into it all now, but I have data showing that happy employees are more likely to stay. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but it's very quick. Unhappy people leave within 3 months. Increased productivity, that's both the quantity and quality of work. Increased creativity and collaboration, which obviously leads to innovation. And even share price. I mean, here's data on share price. So this is the S&P 500 in the US. This is 2008 to 2014. And this is taking a subset of them that are in the best places to work. And you've got significantly higher share price growth. This actually piece of statistics is okay. There's actually a better one from earlier on by a guy called Alex Edmonds, where he showed it was about 2.5% extra share price of growth, which obviously when that compounds up is quite a lot. I mean, Warren Buffett would be fairly happy with that. So there's definitely an alignment case going on here. So it feels to me that there's a big opportunity here. And as a statistician and indeed as a therapist, I'm acutely aware that feelings are data. I mean, in our own lives, when we feel something, it's giving us information about the environment that we're in. And so if we can convert that into numeric data, we can create very valuable data for businesses. And in lots of ways, it's straightforward. It's a hard fought simplicity, this. But, you know, I can ask a question regularly to people: how have you felt at work this week? People can answer this question. They can give you a very reliable answer. It goes up and down. Actually understanding that I needed to measure happiness, well-being very dynamically was the breakthrough thing, because basically we need to respect the fact that we have good and bad times. And actually the idea is to have more good weeks than bad weeks. And I even things like asking people, how have you felt, rather than have you had a good week? If you ask people a question like, have you had a good week? Or people start thinking about what they've delivered. If you ask people how they felt, then it locates them firmly inside them. And so that's the data that I want to do. And when you ask this question repeatedly, you can start drawing interesting graphs. So this is a graph of 2019. So we launched our weekly tool in 2018. I experimented a lot with different ways through the, I don't know what you call the decade, but through the teams, daily, monthly, annually, we did all sorts of things. Weekly turns out to be the best. But this is 2019, the first year that I have data for. I assume it's a relatively typical year. It's a little bit more up and down because we've got, you know, we're building a client base here, so we've got some randomness in the data, but you can see what looks like typical holiday periods. You can see that people don't like the autumn very much at the end of summer. It looks relatively sensible data. I say typical year because obviously 2020 was not a typical year. And if you want to see our data across all of our clients for 2020, it looks like this. And here, you know, we have the severe disruption exactly a year ago from COVID and all the new measures. You know, that week in London was very strange, wasn't it? At the beginning of the week, the tube was full. By Thursday, half empty. And, you know, everyone started going home. And then obviously we had the work from home directive start to go on. But that yellow box is really showing teams displaying resilience. Resilience emerges from the shape of the curve, that by measuring regularly, we see resilience in action. And so, you know, to sort of go back towards sort of Sam's points earlier, you know, if you're going to have an OKR, a KPI, whatever you want to call it, about people, I think you need one that's very responsive, because you're always wanting to look to see whether teams and people are resilient. So Friday Pulse is a platform to build this positivity in businesses. So, you know, I'm now an entrepreneur unexpectedly, but, you know, we create happiness KPIs, we create a team building tool for people to talk about it. We do in-depth culture profiles, we create people analytics, and we've got a lot of inbuilt intelligence in the system that we do. You know, this is a snapshot of one of our dashboards showing a team or an organization with their scores. We create very fun tools. That's not the best image of it, but we send teams a PowerPoint sort of thing every week, which is like, how can they build on what's gone well last week? How can they deal with what didn't go well last week? It's effectively a tech retrospective, but on your culture, on your team culture, and you're trying to create a momentum for people to build a better team collaboration and experiences together. And psychological safety, because if you talk about these things regularly, you start building that trust in the system. And lots of people analytics going on. We can see across the whole organization how people are doing, and you see in the bottom left there, you can see the organization seems to have a problem in work-life balance, which is the red line, and you can see some teams seem to have problems. So some things are across the organization, some across teams, and we build all this for our clients. So there was a very strong Treble way. We always talked about the Treble way when I was a boy. There used to be a magazine called Working Together that went through the 2,000, 3,000 employees, something like about 2,500 employees in the organization. And And I'm trying to now build the Friday way. And that's the business that I'm building. You know, in regards to, you know, if you want to understand more about it, you can actually go and check your own happiness at work on a website called friday1.com, which is a bit like one of those 15, 16 personality types or whatever it is that you can check your own happiness at work. And yeah, I think that building happy businesses are key to long-term success. And as I build my business, and we'll be looking for investment later this year, because although I inherited money from Treble, I've now basically risked as much as I can do in product development, and I've probably made all the sort of mistakes that Mark was speaking about in the last talk, you know. But we have clients that absolutely love us, and clearly we believe that you know, this is a useful tool with massive value for clients. That's basically me.
Nick, thank you so much. What a really interesting story. Every time we speak about that, it resonates so much with me. A couple of quick questions, if I may, for you. This was put in a slightly different context, so I'm going to interpret the question. But with everything you've said, and one of the news stories about Goldman Sachs this week, the opportunity perhaps to look at the happiness factor for a business like that would be interesting, would you not think? Because financially they're steaming ahead as always, but presumably there might be a few more red lines on the document. How would you feel about addressing a business like that?
Well, I mean, independent of Goldman Sachs, work-life balance has been under huge pressure in our data this year. And it's mainly, I think, about the boundaries between work and home. I don't know. I mean, we were talking about it before we all started, but, you know, I didn't manage very long in a consultancy when I was young. I think you can lose a lot of talent if you want people to work 80-hour weeks. Do you actually get the right people to build that business? And I've got a friend who, he sort of went through that system, and he's sort of my age, mid-50s. And he said, problem is, you know, we did it. And now as partners, we're reliant on all these young ones doing these ads. And they don't want to do it anymore. It feels like, you know, it feels unfair. I did it when I was young. They're not prepared to. I actually think the young are getting it right. I think it's going to be a business. I think it's going to be a business system that is more difficult to do, more difficult to implement. I know they're hugely well paid, but, you know, the data from that little report was, you know, all of them are losing relationships. You know, they were getting burnout. And I just, it doesn't feel to me sustainable. It's certainly not the type of business I want to grow. And it's certainly not the type of business that my father and grandfather built. I mean, they used to not do night shifts because they didn't want to disrupt family life in the manufacturing, and they still built a successful business. So I think you can build good businesses. I hope that they don't work out those business models, but I might be wrong.
Mark, if you and Samantha and Andy want to come off mute for a second. Mark, a question for you. I mean, I could pose it to Nick as well, but his is a slightly different scenario because he's been self-funding. But if we asked you the question, Mark, how many funds had you approached and how many were rejected and so on? I mean, I think I know the answer to that, but it was a rather large number that you went through to try and find it in the fund sense. Is that correct?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I think probably the order of 50. Mm-hmm. And you get 50 rejections. So some thick skin is certainly required, I think. Yeah.
And did you find the same thing with the stage of your business with high net worths? Was it the same sort of problem with angels, or is it less so, would you say?
I think it's a different kind of approach with high net worth investors to investment firms. Mm-hmm. I don't think, I mean, Andy would have some views on this. I don't think high net worth they are looking for something which is more personal and tuned to them. You have to know quite a lot about them, I think, before you meet them, and you know, and try and make whatever you're saying resonate with them personally. They're less impressed by a beautiful pitch deck, and in fact, often the reverse. To be blunt about it. So there are different beasts. So it's a bit like I regard those sort of investors like the board as part of the team building process that you're doing, and it can take a lot of time, but it's definitely worth the effort. It is if you can bring in people who are well connected to other angel investors. That is very, very good. You know, the informal angel networks, as it were, that can be very, very helpful. And what I'd say is, just finally, the pandemic has posed special problems, unless you're a business that happens to have benefited from COVID in one way or another. We're not, I'd say. We've suffered from COVID. But having very good investors who are able to see pivots and how you work around difficult exogenous challenges like that's really, really important. And be supportive. Communication is the number one thing you need to do, as you need to do with your team, you need to do with your shareholders.
Andy, when we were talking earlier and you said about the relatively low percentage, I did it roughly, it was about 1.5%, I think you said, of the businesses that actually get funded. And I guess that is sort of bearing out the experience of Mark in some respects, isn't it? Because obviously he's gone to a lot of funds. It's an early stage business. It's a sort of high tech company, which is exactly the sort of business that you're trying to back. So it's not an easy ride for technology companies, is it, trying to go through this process, even if they've followed all the Sequoia rules and got it sorted and so on?
Absolutely not. And unfortunately, it's the successes, the ones, the overnight successes that took 10 years that get all the press, isn't it? And they're the ones, they're the stories that people remember.
Absolutely.
But it's not like that for the majority of people. It's hard, as Mark said.
And Nick, of course, you are completely left field in one sense, because of course you've been in the position to be able to do this yourself. What about you going into the market later this year? Have you thought very much about that now in terms of the time period and how you're going to go about it?
I've found it really hard subject to approach personally, but I think that's partly my background where I've had quite a bit of money. So it's like, you know, you feel obliged to risk it yourself. But as I want to have some money for retirement, I've got getting closer to the edge of what I can do with that. So we will have to. But I mean, in a sense, I come from a background where I'm a researcher, I'm a designer rather than a business person. So I think we haven't been as focused on selling as in designing, and now we have to completely change because we have a good platform now. So we have a not even minimal lovable product. We've got raving fans in some of our clients, so we just have to scale now. And that's our journey really now. And we need scaling funding for that because we've got competitors who aren't nearly as good as us, who just sort of do standard surveys that don't understand the whole science of it, who've got massive funding. So we've got to basically, have some marketing budget to get to that. But we will have a lot more possibility for contagion because people love us and they like my background. So we've got that sort of extra edge that you've got someone like me in the business that can sort of sell it and can have the authority that they know what they're doing. So we have to take advantage of that and maybe make a more bubbling up process than I don't know. So that's our challenge at the moment and what keeps me awake at night.
Samantha, I've got a question for you actually. In terms of you now, in effect, with another startup business, do you think it's better to start a business on your own or is it better to start it with partners?
Oh, that's a tough question. I myself started a business 15 years ago with somebody and it was a disaster and we had the most horrific car crash of a departure. It was a very difficult exit and it wasn't a success. I'm now witnessing within, Expand, I sold my company to my minority shareholders and having pursued trade sales last year, there was I in a pandemic, had no idea that I would sell my company. Actually, the right thing to do was to sell it to my business partners who've been on the journey. So that was a huge success. And now I'm on the periphery of naught and the CTO and the CEO as founders are, they're yin and yang. They are so different, but I think it makes them a tremendous powerhouse. So I think the cop-out answer has to be with the right partner. It has to be a great thing to do.
Right. Andy, related to Samantha actually, is when you're looking at a team dynamics, so you've got a business that you think you're about to invest in, and then you're weighing up which roles might be missing. So if we went around the boardroom table of a classic technology company, it's likely that those earlier stage businesses would have got a chief technology officer in place. They've got a CEO. They may or may not have a good salesperson in place, but they're not likely to have a CFO. What sort of experiences have you got in this area? And could you give some advice to the tech companies about the roles that they might need to fill, and therefore speak to someone like Samantha about before they come talking to you?
Yeah, you've highlighted the key roles that we see are missing, which is often when we invest, which we might be the first institutional investment, if you like, and CFO is often key hire. People were talking earlier about the first sales hire. It's a really important one as well. But it's interesting, the phrase that you mentioned, the role that was missing. And what I'd encourage everyone to think about is not necessarily what role is missing, but what skills are missing, or where the bottleneck is. And I think one of the mistakes maybe that people make is they focus on the role and they try and shoehorn what they need into a title, and then they get enthusiastic about seeing really good experience of big companies, or a glowing CV, and what they really want to focus on is what is the challenge going to be going forward, and can this person deliver? I think Sam was touching on that in how you test somebody in an interview and ask them the right questions about how they would help you through that challenge. So that's what I encourage people to do.
Perhaps related to that one then about the starting situation, obviously when you make an investment into a business, then you're going to have an investment agreement. That would be fair enough. But before we get to that stage, and I think I would ask this to the entrepreneurs, if I may, what kind of agreement did you have in place between the founders of the business when you got underway? Because that founders agreement can be pretty critical, can't it? Mark, do you want to take that first?
I've had different experiences of this. In one, I guess earlier on, I wanted to be very fair to everybody. It deals with the sort of partnership issue. And then it just got extremely complicated from a decision-making point of view, and also a control point of view. So I actually took a slightly different approach with director systems. I in the very, very, very early days, gave away very little equity, but just a little bit. So people consider themselves to be sort of very junior partners, and that actually worked out extremely well, so that I didn't really think about other equity until we were bringing in new money into the business. I'm not quite sure that it answers the problem. You have to look at people's personal motivations as well as to what the equity might mean to them. I mean, I'm, as you know, Les, very driven to build these sort of businesses which have patient and medical benefit. And off the back of that, there's the financial gain. You can have people who join you in the early days, but they may not be completely aligned with that. They may not be looking at the long-term value from an equity point of view, or maybe they're too much interested in the equity and less in what the business is trying to achieve, which can make things really, really difficult. The institutional investors aren't good like that if you get them in too early, actually. While if the business needs to pivot in a direction they don't want you to go. A few thoughts.
Nick, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I was just going to say, nobody's spoken about building a non-executive board early on. As you know, I've been very involved in Aralis, which is a new modular jet aircraft to replace the Hawk, but also do a whole lot more things. And we built a very strong board right from the very beginning. So we had a very experienced non-exec CFO who helped us build this financial strategy from the beginning. I've had a lot of experience of fundraising, so I built the equity planning model all the way through, and we had other people who did some of those roles. And then they had a lot of contacts, so we brought in people that they knew as well. We've built, now we're up to 60 plus people in the business. And as you know, we've done a couple of rounds, and hopefully we're getting very close to closing a 60 million round at the moment, and then we're already working on 150 million round next year. So the question is, what about non-exec boards and getting those in early to get some really good experience around you to help build your business?
Andy, you probably would be one to pick up on that, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Incredibly important, isn't it? I think, and there are a couple of reasons or a couple of benefits to having the board. One is you can bring skills into the business that you wouldn't be able to justify in terms of cost or time. There might be the challenge to benefit from somebody's expertise a couple of days a month, but not necessarily 5 days a week, and you can afford that person on a part-time basis. Incredibly important. Also, I don't know if Mark or Nick would attest to this, but I think being an entrepreneur can sometimes be a lonely time, especially if you set yourself out from the leader. You bring in junior partners. You don't necessarily have somebody on your level to sense check what you're doing or challenge you. And I think a board, particularly early on, can really help in that respect as well, especially someone that's been there and done it before, or is on your side of the table rather than the investor's side of the table. So lots of different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that, and I think it's like it's a recruitment. You should think of your board as just part of the team, and I think getting the right chairman for me was very important. If it's not the right person with the right skill sets, and its personality is going to be very important too, is absolutely crucial. And I mean, we all have skill sets and experiences, but one of those should be that we know our own limitations and we know what we don't, we know we don't know a lot of stuff. And I think a chairman can be very, very helpful. The right kind of chairman can be very helpful like that. I felt with this particular business at the beginning, I did want, let's say, directors who are not executives in the business. With startups, it's very hard to have directors that don't have some skin in the game. They might have invested in, or they might have some sweat equity or something, because that's just part of the remuneration. But they shouldn't be executives. I think that's, for me, is the key thing. They should be non-executive, and they let the CEO and the business get on with things. But they provide a tremendous input and fill in a lot of gaps. And finally, for me, it was also a way of bringing in some very, very good networks that we could leverage from the business.
Yeah, for me, Nick, I'm a team player. I like working in teams, and so I've had a business partner from the beginning. He was the techie, so he's built the whole platform. On a team like that, and I just can't even begin to think of not having had a business partner. You have to have people you can go through thick and thin with, and I also, obviously, Les, you know this, but I use your friend Brian. I don't know if he's on the call, but as our sort of non-exec financial director, so I'm always worried, particularly probably with my personal background, that I'm just making a big mistake. So I'm always wanting to check out with other people whether what we're doing is sensible. So I couldn't imagine doing it on my own. I think I would just go nuts.
Well, I think that's probably brought us to a sort of perfect conclusion. Thanks very much indeed to all our speakers tonight, to Andy, Samantha, Mark and Nick. The presentations were excellent and great interaction as well. I hope you've enjoyed it too. We certainly have. Thanks very much.